Om अखण्डमण्डलाकारं व्याप्तं येन चराचरं तत्पदं दर्शितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। नालीकनिकाशपदाहृदाभ्यां नानाविमोहादिनिवारिकाभ्यां नमज्जनाभीष्टततिप्रदाभ्यां नमो नमः श्रीगुरुपादुकाभ्याम्। Salutations to the Padukas of my reverential Guru, which attracts me to the lotus-like feet of my Guru. It removes all kinds of unwanted desires, born out of ignorance, and fulfills all good desires of those who bow their head before it. Continuing with Tripura Rahasya, we move on to the chapter 9. After the sermon given by Hemalekha, Hemachura attains enlightenment. Hemachura was amazed at this exposition and said, "Princess, you are truly great. Your wisdom is immense. How can I praise the profundity of your teachings?" Now he had been extremely moved by the light that was shown by Hemalekha, and having contemplated and thought about all the discourses that she gave, he was completely amazed. And then he goes on to say, "I have never heard such a story before." All that she had expounded previously seemed a little too much for him to digest. And now he says, "I can see there is inner significance as clearly as if I were gazing at a small fruit on a palm. Now I remember and experience that state within me. How amazing is life! But tell me, who is my mother? Supreme Consciousness? And how was I born from her?" Now she had given him the esoteric meaning of the story that she had told him, and she expounded on the various ways in which senses and the mind, emotions, desires all play havoc and go on and on and on within the mind of a seeker, completely keeping him aloof from the real truth. Now, when he had understood all of this in a little bit of clarity, he asks her that, "Please tell me, who is this mother? Who is this Supreme Consciousness? Is it the awareness that you call mother? Am I born from her? Tell me, who are we and what are we?" O Parshuram, thus asked Hemachura, and Hemalekha replied, "Lord, I will reveal that deep secret. Listen respectfully with one-pointed and purified mind. The self, Atman, cannot be preached or described. How can I explain? The moment you know yourself, you will know your mother." So she goes on to tell him that this is not something that words could ever explain. Anything that she says or anything that he reads or tries to find out from an external source will be nothing but a piece of borrowed knowledge. So she tells him it is unless and until he has experienced it, this is not something that he will ever be able to figure out, that who is the Atman, who is the self sitting within. And once you know the self, she says, you will also know your mother. No one can teach you about the nature of the self, for the intellect through which a person thinks is also dependent on Atman. You can recognize the self only through that self. The entire universe, from the grossest to the subtlest, is known through the Atman. That Atman can be experienced only through the knowledge of self, but is never the object of knowledge itself. So she explains to him that you can experience this knowledge, but knowledge alone will not suffice. It is beyond description, time, space, and causation. Even the best of teachers cannot show you the light of your eyes. The self is realized by the glory of the self alone. So it is like the eyes are seeing the objects all around, but the eye cannot see itself. Although when light falls onto an object and gets reflected and falls on the retina, the picture is formed on the landscape of the mind, and you can see an object, but the eye itself cannot see itself. So same is the case with the self. The self can perceive everything, but the self can only be known through the self. A master's role is only to reveal the path leading to the supreme reality. All I can do is show you the way to absolute truth. Be attentive. Any object that you consider yours is different from your real self. Go into solitude and discriminate what is you and what is not. The self lies beyond cognition. For example, I am your wife. I am related to you, but I am not you. Renounce everything that you consider yours. The self can never be renounced. By knowing the self, you will be liberated. Having received these instructions from his wife, Hemachura mounted his horse and left the city. He reached his garden, as beautiful as the garden of Indra, in which there was a crystal temple. He entered the temple. He left all his servants outside and ordered the guards to allow no one to enter while he was contemplating. Not even the ministers, teachers, his father, the king, no one would be allowed inside. He went into absolute solitude to contemplate on the self. He sat down there on a cushion made of cotton, made his mind one-pointed, and began contemplating. During that time, he was all alone. Why are people deluded? No one here knows about the self. People perform actions with the hope of enjoying themselves. Some of them are reciting the Vedas, and some are studying the scriptures. Some of them are busy accumulating money, and rulers are engrossed in administrations. Others are embroiled in arts and indulging in sensual pleasure. Although no one knows what is the self, people perform actions for their own benefit. Why is there such delusion? So he goes on thinking that when everything that people do is not actually the self, then why are they doing it? They are going on and on and on and on, indulging in various kinds of activities, in various kinds of sense gratification, in various kinds of doing, but they forever remain away from the knowledge of the self. Without realizing the self, all activities are theatrical and in vain. So now I'm going to contemplate on the self alone. My palace, wealth, kingdom, wife, and cattle cannot be myself. They are mine, but none of these are mine, and none of them are me. They belong to you, but they are not you, is what he starts his contemplation from. Because of ignorance, I feel that they are mine, but in true reality, they are not mine. My body is my instrument. I am the son of a king with healthy limbs and fair complexion. Everyone identifies himself with the body. So far, the prince was identifying himself with his body. Body consciousness should be transcended by understanding the fact that his body is his, but the real self is different from the body. So this body is yours, but you are not the body. The mind is yours, but you are not the mind. Eventually, he stopped identifying himself with the body, which is the basis of attachment. He thought, how can this body be the self? It is composed of blood, bone, and other components. It is ever changing, like wood or a mountain which decay. Dreams are part of life, like waking and sleeping. If I am not aware of my body in dream and sleep states, I cannot be my body. The same is the case of my prana, the vital energy. I cannot be my mind or intellect either. My mind and my intellect are my instruments. Undoubtedly, every component of myself, from my body to my intellect, is different from me, the self. No one experiences this non-existence. There is no doubt that I exist, but I do not know through what means I experience my own existence. Why do I not realize it directly? All material objects are experienced through the senses, tangible objects through the skin, and mental objects through the mind. Buddhi, the intellect, can be distinguished through its decisive function. But how do I experience myself? I do not know. He was suddenly plunged into great astonishment. Having a glimpse of the self, he was exhilarated and started meditating intensely. So there was some awareness that had started arising, that all that he had identified himself with all these days, his roles, his relationships, his feelings, his emotions, were not his, because they were ever changing, and something which is ever changing couldn't be self. And with this little awareness, he started meditating aggressively, intensely. And with that restlessness and conflict of the mind, when they were all controlled, he saw light emanating from everywhere. After the light vanished, he wondered, what was it? Oh, why am I experiencing so many diversities? Curious, he controlled his mind once more, directing it inward. This time his mind slipped into deep sleep. He shifted from deep sleep to the dream state, where he had many unusual experiences. On waking, he started thinking, was all this a dream? Whatever light or darkness I experienced might have been the fragments of a dream. Dreams are imagery in the mind. How can I go beyond them? Let me know. What is it? And now make an effort to control my mind and its modifications. He again made an effort and found himself in deep bliss. After a while, his mind began functioning in the waking state. He wondered, what is it all about? He could not discriminate between dream and hallucination. This experience was beyond his imagination. This unique experience of bliss cannot be compared with the experience I had before. He felt as though I was asleep and not aware of the external world. I found this blissful experience peculiar. I could not see any explanation for this. How did it happen? I was trying to realize the nature of the self, which still remains a mystery to me. I see the Atman in so many different ways. What is all this actually? Is it light, darkness, bliss, or something else? Are these parameters of the self in different forms? I am not able to reach any conclusion. So he is in a complete dilemma because he has experienced some bliss. So he is trying to find that which he experienced as deep sleep. Was it the self? The bliss that he experienced in deep sleep was because his mind did not exist. The self inward that he was looking at also did not exist. Nothing existed except for the bliss alone. But he is getting confused now, and he is wondering, was all that I was experiencing in deep sleep, and then I was experiencing the same bliss in a wakeful state, and then the same when I was not contemplating? What is it? Is it different forms of the self? Is it different forms and modifications of what the self is? What actually is this? Is it light? Is it dark? Is it bliss? Is it something else? What is it that I am experiencing? Because what has happened is now he has successfully made a distance between the self and the mind. And so all the noise that crowds around the self has left. What is left is being experienced in the waking state, in the deep sleep, and in his awareness of a dream. And also when he is wakeful, he experiences little moments of this bliss. But he is not able to reach any conclusion as to what is this. So he says, let me call my learned wife. She understands all these things. And then he called for Hemalekha to come and see him. Now in an hour's time, Hemalekha arrived and climbed up the stairs like the queen of the night traveling in blue sky. And there she saw her beloved husband, the prince, whose mind was tranquil, steady, and free from all modifications, and whose senses were completely withdrawn. She sat down next to him. The prince opened his eyes to find his dear wife beside him. The moment he looked at her, she embraced him lovingly and spoke in a sweet voice, Lord, why did you call me? Are you healthy? Tell me the reason you summoned me here. The prince replied, Darling, after listening to your teachings, I retreated here to realize the self directly. I started contemplating. I thought that my mind was focused inward, but actually it was not. I was aware of many things other than the self. I can differentiate between the self and the non-self. Then I saw darkness, light, and many other scenes. And occasionally I felt great joy. What is all this? What is the nature of the self? Or is it something else? Please explain it clearly so that I can experience it directly. At his request, Hemalekha, the knower of truth, spoke gently about the world and beyond. My dear, listen to me. Whatever effort you have made to control the external modifications of your mind is very good. All the adepts consider this to be one of the most important ways of attaining the goal. Without that, no one would have knowledge of the self. Self-realization does not need any evidence because self-existent reality is present all the time. If it is present already, why does it need to be attained? Atman is not attainable through any state of mind. Direct knowledge of the self is the purpose of all sadhana. There is no moment when the self does not exist. That which is self-existent is not subject to attainment. Let me give you a few examples. Suppose something is hidden in the dark. When the darkness is removed by the light of a lamp, then the object is finally revealed. That is the case with Atman. Suppose a person hides a cache of gold and then forgets where he puts it. He stops thinking about everything else and concentrates on finding the gold. In this way, he finally remembers. This is how one remembers the presence of the Atman. Avoiding thinking about other objects is not the reason that the mind finds the gold. In the same manner, controlling the modifications of the mind is not the cause of attainment of the self. You are not aware of the nature of the self, that is why you do not experience it directly. A person who has never seen a lamp may visit a palace at night. He sees light as well as courtiers, but does not recognize the source of the light. Consider this. After controlling the modifications of your mind, you saw darkness. But before that darkness appeared, there was a brief instant of complete silence and an absence of all objective awareness, including the awareness of the darkness. In that state in which you are entirely alone, you are only with yourself. Always think of that state of experience. It is the source of supreme bliss. People with outward-oriented minds remain unaware of this state. Learned and skillful seekers continue their search, yet do not attain that highly evolved state. These seekers worry and become sad. They do not know that state. Theoretical knowledge of scriptures can never make anyone adept. The philosophy of the self is not a mere theory, which is subject to discussion. Self-realization is beyond all argumentation. Realization of the self is never attained by running here and there. Stillness is important. No matter how far one goes, one cannot attain the self-realization that is attained through steadiness. Pure knowledge is not realized through mere contemplation. It is realized after renouncing all desires, but never by performing any action. Just as one cannot capture the shadow of his own head by running after it, self-realization is not possible through any physical or mental effort. A child can see thousands of reflections on the surface of a clear mirror, but does not notice the mirror itself. Similarly, in the vast mirror of the Atman, people see the entire universe reflected, but do not become aware of the Atman itself. Although a person is familiar with the concept of space, he will attain to the objects present in the space, never noticing the space itself. So there may be so many things within a room. There may be a table, there may be a chair, there may be books, there may be a bed, and there may be bags, there may be clothes, there may be people, all of them are within a space. You are seeing all of them within the room, but the space that is enclosed and holding all these objects is not perceived by the eye, by the mind's eye, because you're not aware that all of this lies within an encapsulated space. Similarly, the self is experiencing everything. The self is communicating. The self is feeling everything. But all this is a reflection in the mirror called the self, the Atman. And while experiencing all of this, while communicating with all of this, one loses sight of this mirror in which all the reflection is happening. My Lord, think about this world of subjective and objective duality at an even more subtle level. The subjective aspect, the knowledge, is self-evident, and without it, nothing can exist. Although knowledge of the self is the ultimate source of all valid knowledge, it is not the object of any kind of cognition. Everything is springing out from this source within. If this source within does not exist, nothing outside exists. So although the knowledge of the self is the ultimate source of all the valid knowledge, it is not the object of any kind of cognition. You cannot perceive it by trying to perceive it. One who denies knowledge has no ground to stand on. It is not possible to have a discussion with such a person. Like a reflection in a mirror, everything shines in the Atman. The knowledge of the Atman is beyond the limitations of time or space. Self-luminous consciousness is the knower, and that alone is real. Just as space appears compartmentalized by physical objects, knowledge only appears to be limited by time and space. O Prince, the pure and still mind can realize the unity in diversity. By realizing the self, one becomes the self. Now I will tell you the means of attaining it. By using your faculty of discrimination, observe the moment between dreaming and wakefulness, as well as periods between two thoughts. With the help of a calm and still mind, the state between sleep and waking can be understood. So what she means to say is the space between sleep and waking is either a state of dreaming or a state of deep sleep. So when you're dreaming, most of the times, if you would have noticed, you tend to remember portions, bits and pieces, or the entire dream in its totality. Why? Because there is someone inside which is aware of the dream, and you're able to recall the dream when you are awake. In the case of a deep sleep, the presence of the self is still there, which is why when you wake up from a deep sleep, you feel very nice. Why do you feel very nice? Because that state of deep sleep is when nothing existed. The mind did not exist. The various relationships, thoughts, emotions, circumstances, time, space, nothing existed. So when nothing existed, it led to a state of deep blissfulness. And that blissfulness brings about a deep sense of rest, a deep sense of feeling rejuvenated. So the self remembers that restfulness of the deep sleep. So the self is existent whether it is in the state of deep sleep or it is in the state of dreaming or wakeful. The thing is, the blissfulness that she is referring to in the state of deep sleep, if that same blissfulness can be experienced in a waking state, is what is referred to as turiya. So she goes on to say that by using your faculty of discrimination, observe the moment between dreaming and wakefulness, as well as the periods between two thoughts. So between one thought coming and leaving and the next one arising, there is a period in between. That period in between is similar to the space between dreaming and wakefulness. And with the help of a calm mind and a still mind, the state between sleep and waking can be understood. It can be understood by keeping the presence intact, the awareness of the self alone, with a certain sense of ease, by not doing anything. It is not mental alertness, because mental alertness means you're exerting yourself to be alert. This is a state of being conscious, consciously aware, between the presence changing its form during sleep and waking. The presence alone, it just is. So this is what she says: by using the discrimination, the faculty of discrimination, observe the observer, observe the moment between dreaming and wakefulness. In the real self, there is no form, taste, smell, touch, or sound. There are no senses either. There is no pain or pleasure. There is no loss or gain. This is the summum bonum of life. Although it is the source of all, it is beyond all. It is the Lord of all, the creator, preserver, and annihilator. Let the seeker stop the growing flow of the mind by turning it inward and remain aware of the self, which is the self of all. Learn not to identify yourself with your thought patterns. Then you will be witnessing the world and its objects as different from yourself. The time is short. Hurry up. The problem with the human being is that he thinks he's here forever. Well, the truth is, with every breath, you're inching towards your grave. There isn't much time. We have lost many, 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 many moments of awareness already, and we do not know how many more births we would take if we do not make use of this time here and now. So she says, time is short. Hurry up. Hemachura followed the instructions imparted by his wife literally. For a long time he remained constantly aware of the self. When he came out of samadhi, he forgot the objects of enjoyment. So that was chapter 9 on attaining peace. Now moving further, going to chapter 10, which talks about the teachings of Hemalekha and how the whole city became wise. Hemalekha now realized that her husband was established in supreme consciousness and left him undisturbed. After a while, he opened his eyes and saw his wife. But as soon as he tried to close his eyes and re-enter that peaceful state, his wife caught hold of his hand and spoke to him sweetly. "O Prince, tell me, what is your plan? What have you attained after closing your eyes? And what have you lost by opening them? I would love to hear about your inner experience." Now, due to inertia, Hemachura's mind was sluggish. He did not want to speak and spoke with the lassitude of a drunken man. So with a very groggy voice he said, "Sweetheart, for the first time in my life I am at peace. I find no satisfaction in external activities. These activities are all tasteless as a pulp of sugarcane after the juice has been squeezed out. I do not need them. I was blind before, and I did not experience this transcendental peace." Well, there was some truth to what he was saying, but he was again in a different city of the mind where he thought that only closing the eyes would give him this peace, and all relationship with anything external is not required, and he's trying to denounce all of it. Like the man who did not realize that there was a treasure hidden in his house and who wandered begging without knowing this ever-present bliss. I considered sensual pleasure to be satisfying and paramount. I see now that worldly pleasures are fleeting and laden with misery. I kept running after worldly pleasures without discriminating between pain and pleasure and did not find any peace at all. Alas, due to lack of discrimination, people find only pain and misery in the name of attaining happiness. I do not want to endure my self-created miseries anymore. I pay homage to you for this respectful gesture of my hands. So he folds his hands and he pays homage to his wife. Be generous with me and leave me alone. I want only to rest in the blissful Atman. Alas, it seems as though you are unfortunate, because even after realizing this state, you are still caught, experiencing the pains of the world and not enjoying the bliss, he tells his wife. That wise lady answered with a smile, "My lord, you do not seem to have attained that pure state. The state of knowledge in which a realized soul never again becomes deluded is far beyond your comprehension, exactly as the earth is as far from the sky. What you think you understand correctly is like no understanding at all. That self-illumined state of being cannot be seen either by opening or closing the eyes. I cannot explain this simply by words, and it cannot be attained by action or inaction, by renouncing home or living at home. If it is attained by closing your eyes, doing something or going somewhere, then how can it be supreme? That is poor knowledge, the awareness of which disappears when you open your eyes. How heavy is your delusion! What can I say about your amazing belief that knowledge of the absolute reality in which millions of galaxies rest in a small corner disappears when you open your eyelids? O Prince, I will elaborate this further. Unless the knots of your ignorance are cut asunder, bliss cannot be realized. Failing to recognize the self is the cause of illusion. There are innumerable knots of ignorance. Seeing something different from the self is the first knot of ignorance. Those who identify their bodies with the self are ignorant. They go through the constant flux of misery and the cycles of birth and death. The second knot is a distinction between the self and the world. The world is like a mirror on which reflections are made. Seeing a difference between individuals and God is another knot. This ignorance regarding the self existed from the very beginning. It became tangled many times and has become a very complicated knot. It is with this knot that the individuals are bound. Cutting this knot asunder is called liberation. The perfection you attained after closing your eyes is an aspect of your own self which remains after denying the existence of all material objects. This is the finite mirror in which the entire phenomenal world is reflected. This is the infinite mirror. So she says that you cannot be refusing to acknowledge the presence of all these objects of the world around you. Tell me in which object, gross or subtle, that the self does not exist. As a barren woman cannot have a son, similarly, the real self can never be absent in an object. Without a mirror, there cannot be a reflection, and without the light of the Atman, all this would be unreal. Therefore, without self-existent reality, nothing can exist. In such a state, it does not make any difference whether you open or close your eyes. If one believes that there is a particular method for attaining the self, that belief itself is a knot. As long as the feeling that I know reality through a particular method remains, you have not attained reality. Because anything that can be achieved through any method is not the absolute. What you believe to have attained by closing your eyes cannot be the ultimate because its perfection is marred by the process itself. Supreme knowledge is like an omnipotent and omniscient fire that consumes all illusions. All mental impurities are burnt by the fire of knowledge. After realizing that state, nothing more remains to be attained. After cutting this knot asunder, one has perfect mastery over the mind and its modifications. See the blissful, all-pervading Atman. See the entire reflection of the universe in the mirror of the Atman within you. Do not ever contemplate that all this is Atman. Rather, transcend and become established in the experience of the Atman itself. Hearing his wife, Hemachura's mind became completely purified. After seeing the perfect self everywhere, all his confusions vanished. Step by step, with his firm faith, he attained maturity in his realization and became firm in that consummate state. After that, he lived for several years as a Jivan Mukta, liberated here and now. Liberation is not a thing to be attained in some other plane of existence. It is not something to be attained after death, that you get transported into some other world where liberation is granted. It is here and now, while enjoying worldly pleasures, conquering enemies, amassing wealth, and performing elaborate religious ceremonies and rituals. He still, with all the world around him, became a Jivan Mukta, while being alive, here and now, a liberated soul. Seeing this state, both his brother Muktachur and his uncle Manichur wondered, why is Hemchura not as before? He is neither exhilarated by pleasures nor affected by pain. How did he establish himself in the self by attaining tranquility? These days he takes care of the entire administration like an actor on a stage. He is overwhelmed with bliss all the time. He performs his duties consciously, yet it seems as though his mind is firmly established in the self. How did this happen? Curious, they approached Hemachura one day and asked, how did you attain this state of self-illumination? He explained the whole story, and hearing that, his father and uncle too became enlightened. After that, the king's ministers also were liberated. In this way, everyone in that great city, even the children and the cowherds, learned the method of attaining bliss. Men and women, young and old, after learning about pure consciousness and the universe, transcended their egos and body awareness. By having control over their emotions, they performed their worldly duties. Mothers fed their children while discussing the absolute reality. Servants would talk about truth as they worked, and actors performed dramas with spiritual themes. Musicians composed songs of spiritual wisdom, and comedians entertained their audience, making them aware through comedy that the world in which they live is false. Teachers presented scriptures full of spiritual examples in order to strengthen the zeal of the students. In that great city, men, women, servants, actors, clowns, soldiers, laborers, architects, courtesans, all realized the ultimate goal. Although they continued their occupation as determined by their previous sanskaras, they never considered their given duties to be good or bad, auspicious or inauspicious. They bothered themselves neither about the past nor the future, and thus remained cheerful by living in the present, overwhelmed with the bliss while discharging their duties. The seer Sankha and other rishis once came to that city and named it Vidyanagara, the city of wisdom. Parrots and cockatoos in their cages sang the song of eternal wisdom. Contemplate the self as pure consciousness beyond both subject and object. Like reflections in a mirror, this external world is not different from consciousness. I am consciousness, and consciousness is immovable, yet it makes other objects move. O people of the world, end your ignorance by fixing your awareness one-pointedly on ever-illumined consciousness. Meditate on that which is the source of all. This illustrious city, where even the birds spoke wisely, still exists today. Thus, in ancient times, King Hemachura received knowledge from Hemalekha and lived as a knower of truth and a liberated being. Through him, all men, women, and children of that region realized the absolute truth. Dattatreya continued his teachings to Parshuram. Therefore, Satsang, the company of sages, is the first step in attaining the highest goal. One who aspires to attain the ultimate should seek the company of the saints. So this was what the chapter 10 contained, the analysis and the knowledge of the Atman. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते। ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः।